The wolf should have died before midnight. Its silver fur was stained with blood. Frost had already begun to seal the wounds that refused to stop bleeding. Snow gathered across its broad back until it looked less like a living creature and more like another frozen stone abandoned beneath the ancient pines. Travelers hurried past without slowing their steps. Every child in Frostvale had grown up hearing the same warning. Never touch a lone wolf in winter. If it had no pack beside it, it was either cursed, or it had done something terrible enough to deserve dying alone. Everyone believed that. Everyone except one forgotten girl. Elara Ashwood tightened her fingers around the worn edges of the only cloak she owned. The wind sliced through the forest like invisible knives, stinging her cheeks until they burned. Her basket held little more than dried roots and a handful of mushrooms she had searched half the day to find. If the storm grew worse, even reaching her tiny cottage before dawn would become impossible. Then she heard it, a single, exhausted breath. Not a growl, not a howl, a plea. She stepped between the snow-covered trees and found him lying beneath the broken branches of an old cedar. The wolf's golden eyes opened only halfway before closing again. His breathing had become so shallow that each breath looked like it might be his last. Blood darkened the snow beneath him. Someone had hunted him. Someone powerful enough to wound a beast this large. Elara slowly knelt to spite, every instinct telling her to run. "You've suffered enough," she whispered. The wolf watched her through half-closed eyes. There was fear there, not fear of dying, fear that she would leave. Without thinking any longer, she unclasped the weathered cloak from her shoulders and gently wrapped it over the trembling wolf. "You'll need this more than I do." For one impossible heartbeat, the wolf looked directly into her eyes. His gaze wasn't wild. It wasn't animal. It was the gaze of someone who understood every word she had spoken. Then distant howls echoed across the frozen pines. One voice, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Elara slowly lifted her head toward the dark forest. Something enormous was coming. Winter had never shown mercy to the forgotten. The wealthy families of Frostvale spent the cold months behind thick stone walls, their hearths burning day and night while servants carried steaming meals through warm halls. Beyond the villages, however, the forest belonged to silence, hunger, and snow. That was where Elara lived. Her cottage leaned against the edge of the frozen pines, as though the forest itself had grown tired of holding it upright. The roof sagged beneath heavy snow, and every gust of wind found another crack in the weathered walls. Smoke rarely rose from its chimney for long, because there was never enough firewood to keep a blaze alive. Still, every morning before sunrise, Elara followed the same routine. She swept the snow away from the small path leading to her door. She checked the old bird feeders hanging from frozen branches. She scattered the last handful of grain she could spare. The birds always arrived. Some mornings squirrels followed. Occasionally a timid fox appeared just beyond the trees, watching her with careful curiosity before disappearing again. Animals had never feared her. People often did. The nearby village spoke of Elara with uncomfortable silence. Some pitied the orphan whose parents had vanished years ago. Others whispered that wolves had taken them because they had trusted beasts more than their own kind. Children repeated stories they barely understood. Adults never corrected them. So Elara learned long ago that loneliness asked fewer questions than people. That afternoon the storm had arrived earlier than expected. Heavy clouds swallowed the pale winter sun until the entire forest turned blue beneath gathering darkness. Snow drifted sideways through the trees, covering old tracks within moments. Elara pulled her cloak tighter around herself as she searched beneath fallen logs for edible roots. "Just enough for tonight," she murmured. "Tomorrow could worry about itself." The wind answered with another sharp whistle. She should have gone home then. Instead, she heard the breathing, weak, uneven, painfully slow. At first she thought it belonged to an injured deer. Then she noticed the paw prints. They were enormous. Fresh blood stained the snow between them. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Any sensible person would have turned back. Instead, she followed. Each step carried her deeper into the ancient pines where sunlight rarely reached the ground, even during summer. Snow muffled every sound except the soft crunch beneath her boots and the fading rhythm of strained breathing ahead. When she finally pushed aside a curtain of low branches, she froze. The wolf lay beneath an ancient cedar, one side of his silver coat soaked crimson. An iron-tipped hunting spear had grazed his shoulder, leaving a deep wound. Around his neck, barely visible beneath frozen fur, strange markings circled like carved moonlight. Elara frowned. "I've never seen markings like yours." The wolf opened one eye, golden, clear, watching. He didn't snarl, didn't bare his teeth. He simply looked at her as though trying to decide whether she was real. She slowly crouched several feet away. "If you wanted to hurt me," she whispered, "you already would have." The wolf blinked once. His breathing shuddered. Another gust of freezing wind swept through the clearing. Elara looked toward the darkening sky. Night would arrive soon. If she stayed, she might freeze. If she left, the wolf certainly would. Her fingers tightened around the clasp of her cloak. For several long moments, she argued with herself. Without the cloak, the journey home would become dangerous. Without it, she might not survive the storm herself. Then she remembered something her mother had once said beside a winter fire many years ago. Kindness only matters when it costs something. The memory hurt more than the cold. Slowly, Elara removed the cloak from her shoulders. Instantly the winter air bit through her thin dress. She ignored it. Kneeling beside the wounded animal, she carefully spread the faded wool over his trembling body. "There," she whispered with a small smile. "You're warmer than I am now." The wolf stared at her. Not with confusion, not with fear, with something that looked dangerously close to gratitude. As she gently brushed snow away from his face, her fingertips paused. The strange markings near his neck weren't natural. They resembled an ancient crest, a crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars. She had seen the symbol only once before, carved above the abandoned shrine outside the village. Before she could think further, the wolf suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood alert. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was listening. Elara held her breath. At first, nothing. Then the forest answered. One howl echoed across the mountains. Another answered from the valley below. Then another. Within seconds, the entire frozen pines awakened. Dozens, hundreds. Deep voices rolled through the snow-covered forest like thunder, shaking loose frost from every branch. The wounded wolf slowly closed his eyes again. Not in fear, in recognition. Elara turned toward the darkness beyond the trees. Shapes moved between the falling snow. Large, silent, watching. One pair of glowing golden eyes became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became more than she could count. The wolves had found them, and they were coming closer. The wolves did not rush her. That frightened Elara far more than if they had. They emerged from the curtain of falling snow one after another, their paws making almost no sound against the frozen earth. Massive gray wolves, black wolves whose coats seemed to swallow the moonlight, white wolves whose fur blended perfectly with the drifting storm. Every pair of golden eyes remained fixed on the clearing, not on the wounded wolf. On her. Elara's pulse thundered in her ears. She had lived beside the frozen pines long enough to recognize ordinary wolves. These creatures were different, larger, stronger. Their movements carried discipline instead of instinct, as though each knew exactly where to stand without a single growl or command. A pack. No. An army. The wounded silver wolf stirred beneath the cloak she had given him. He forced himself onto trembling legs, though every movement reopened the wound along his shoulder. Elara instinctively reached toward him. "Don't," she whispered. "You'll bleed again." To her surprise, he obeyed. Several wolves lowered their heads the instant they saw him standing. Others released soft whines that sounded strangely relieved. The largest black wolf stepped forward, his scarred muzzle lifted toward the wounded silver wolf. For a tense heartbeat, Elara expected a challenge. Instead, the enormous wolf pressed his forehead gently against the silver wolf's neck. A gesture of absolute loyalty. The rest of the pack followed. One by one, they bowed. Elara stared in stunned silence. They weren't bowing to the wounded wolf alone. Several lowered their heads in her direction as well. "I don't understand," she breathed. The silver wolf turned toward her. His golden eyes held hers for a long moment before he looked toward the forest path. It almost felt like an invitation. The storm worsened with every passing minute. Snow swirled so heavily that the trees disappeared behind white curtains. Remaining in the clearing meant certain death from the cold. The wolves already knew where they were going. Slowly, cautiously, Elara followed. The journey through the forest felt unreal. Not a single wolf threatened her. Instead, they formed a silent circle around her and the wounded silver wolf, shielding them from the biting wind. Whenever snow drifted too deeply across the narrow trails, the wolves cleared a path simply by walking ahead. Hours passed before the trees finally opened onto a frozen valley. Torches burned across its far edge. Horsemen waited beside them. The instant they spotted the approaching wolves, every rider dismounted. The Alpha! The cry echoed through the valley. Dozens of armored warriors hurried forward, but none crossed an invisible line until the silver wolf himself stepped beyond it. Captain Garrick Thorne pushed through the soldiers, his weathered face drained of color. "My king!" He dropped to one knee. The warriors followed. Elara blinked. "King!" Confusion tangled inside her thoughts. She looked at the wounded wolf. The wolf looked back. Then, beneath the pale light of the winter moon, something impossible happened. Silver light rippled across his body. His bones shifted beneath gleaming fur. The massive wolf slowly rose onto two legs as moonlight wrapped around him like flowing water. Fur withdrew. Claws became hands. The battered beast disappeared. Standing where the wolf had been was a tall man with broad shoulders and long silver hair that rested against a dark cloak hastily placed around him by the royal guards. A deep wound still marked his shoulder, stained with fresh blood. His golden eyes had not changed. Neither had the quiet steadiness within them. Elara forgot to breathe. The man before her could only be one person. Alpha King Kaelin Frostfang. Stories of him filled every village in Frostvale. Children imagined him as an unstoppable warrior who defeated rogue packs with a single command. Elders spoke of a king who traveled every winter in wolf form to honor an oath kept by every ruler before him. No one had ever mentioned that he looked at people before speaking, or that exhaustion lined his face despite the respect surrounding him. Kaelin's gaze never left Elara. "You stayed," he said quietly. His voice was calm, roughened by pain. Elara found herself answering honestly. "I couldn't leave someone to die. Not someone. Something." She realized she hadn't called him a wolf. Kaelin noticed. A faint expression, almost too subtle to recognize, crossed his face. Gratitude. Before another word could be spoken, several council attendants hurried forward, carrying thick fur blankets. One elderly healer examined Kaelin's shoulder, his expression darkening almost immediately. This wasn't done by ordinary steel. Kaelin remained silent. The healer inhaled sharply. "Poison." The word spread through the gathered guards like a sudden winter wind. Captain Garrick's hand immediately found the hilt of a sword. Someone knew His Majesty would travel alone tonight. Kaelin nodded once. They planned this. Elara listened without understanding the full weight of those words, but she recognized one thing. Whoever had attacked the Alpha King hadn't merely wanted him wounded. They had expected him never to return. A pair of servants approached Elara with careful hesitation. "My lady," one of them said, bowing awkwardly, "His Majesty requests that you accompany us to Moonstone Palace." Elara stepped back. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," Kaelin answered himself. "You saved my life." His tone carried no grand emotion, only certainty. Before she could reply, another voice interrupted from the shadows. "A village girl." The speaker wore elegant winter robes, embroidered with silver thread. Lady Seraphine descended from a carriage, her expression perfectly composed despite the storm. Her eyes swept over Elara's worn boots, patched dress, and frostbitten hands. Then she smiled. It never reached her eyes. "How fortunate!" The words sounded less like gratitude and more like suspicion. Kaelin noticed the expression immediately. "So did I." His quiet reply ended the conversation before it could begin. Seraphine inclined her head politely, but the brief flicker in her gaze revealed disappointment. She had expected something else. Someone else. As preparations began for the journey back to the palace, a sudden hush spread across the valley. Even the wolves became still. From the far side of the snow-covered ridge, an enormous white wolf slowly appeared. Time itself seemed to pause. His coat shimmered like untouched snow beneath moonlight. Age lined his powerful face, yet every step carried impossible dignity. The other wolves immediately lowered themselves until their bellies touched the frozen ground. Even Kaelin bowed his head. The ancient wolf ignored everyone. He walked past the Alpha King, past the warriors, past the royal guards. He stopped directly before Elara. Without a sound, the oldest wolf in Frostvale slowly bent one knee, then the other, and lowered his head before her. No one spoke, because no one had ever seen Elder Fenrir kneel before anyone. Moonstone Palace rose from the mountains like a fortress carved from winter itself. Its silver-gray towers pierced the morning mist while frozen waterfalls glittered beneath the pale sun. Massive wolf statues guarded the entrance, their stone eyes watching every visitor who crossed the bridge spanning the icy ravine below. Colorful banners, bearing the crescent moon of Frostvale, fluttered against the cold wind. Elara had never imagined a place like it. She walked behind Captain Garrick with uncertain steps, painfully aware that her boots left melting snow across polished stone floors that servants had spent hours cleaning. Every noble they passed paused to stare, not because of her clothes, because of the wolves. More than 30 royal wolves walked quietly beside her as though escorting someone far more important than an orphan from the forest. The palace servants whispered behind lowered hands. The wolves have never entered the eastern halls. Why are they following her? Is she some kind of healer? No. I heard she bewitched the Alpha. Rumors spread faster than footsteps. Elara lowered her eyes and continued walking. She had survived years of whispered gossip in the village. She refused to let strangers decide who she was now. Captain Garrick stopped before a pair of carved oak doors. This will be your chamber until His Majesty decides otherwise. My chamber, Elara repeated. He nodded. You are the Alpha King's honored guest. She looked at the luxurious room waiting beyond the doorway. A roaring fireplace, fresh bread, warm blankets, soft furs covering the floor. It looked larger than the cottage she had called home her entire life. There must be another room. Garrick frowned. This one was prepared for you. It is too much. For the first time since meeting her, the battle-hardened captain smiled. The palace has many rooms, but only one guest who gave away her last cloak. Without another word, he quietly closed the door behind her. Elara stood in silence. The warmth filling the room felt almost uncomfortable after years of cold. She carefully placed her worn basket near the fireplace instead of on the polished table. Old habits were difficult to forget. A gentle scratching sound interrupted her thoughts. She turned. One of the palace windows stood slightly open. A tiny gray wolf pup squeezed through the gap before tumbling awkwardly onto the rug. His oversized paws slid across the polished floor until he bumped into a chair. Instead of crying, he sneezed, then looked at Elara with bright amber eyes. She couldn't help smiling. Well, she crouched. You certainly chose an unusual entrance. The little wolf cautiously approached. He sniffed her hands, her sleeves. Then, after deciding she was acceptable, he climbed directly into her lap and curled into a tiny ball. A soft knock echoed through the room. 2 palace attendants entered carrying breakfast trays. The instant they noticed the pup, both froze. Prince Nico, one whispered. Elara blinked. Prince. The attendants exchanged nervous glances. The youngest royal pup. He belongs in the Western nursery. The older servant stepped carefully toward him. My little prince, your tutors are waiting. Nico opened one eye, then buried his nose deeper beneath Elara's arm. The servant sighed. He never listens. May I try? Elara asked. She gently scratched behind the pup's ears. Nico! The tiny wolf lifted his head immediately. His tail wagged. She smiled. I think your family is looking for you. After a moment's hesitation, the pup licked her hand before hopping onto the floor. The attendants stared in disbelief. The older servant swallowed. He obeyed. Word spread through Moonstone Palace before noon. The Alpha's wolves followed the village girl. The royal pup obeyed her. None of the handlers could explain why. By afternoon, the palace courtyards had become strangely crowded. Warriors pretending to train glanced toward Elara whenever she crossed the gardens. Servants invented errands, simply to pass nearby. Even visiting nobles interrupted conversations to watch the wolves surrounding her. Lady Seraphine watched more carefully than anyone. Standing beneath an archway, she observed as 3 veteran war wolves abandoned their handlers and calmly walked toward Elara. They've never done that before, one handler muttered. They answer only the Alpha. Seraphine's elegant smile remained unchanged. Yet inside, unease tightened like ice around her thoughts. This was dangerous. Not because of the girl, because symbols mattered. If the wolves accepted someone publicly, the people soon followed. Meanwhile, Kalen stood alone on a balcony overlooking the training grounds. His injured shoulder remained tightly bandaged beneath a dark cloak, but his attention wasn't on the warriors. It rested entirely on Elara. Garrick joined him quietly. She's exactly as the villagers described. Kalen raised an eyebrow. And how is that? Kind. Quiet. Always helping others. He paused. They also said she's unfortunate. Kalen continued watching below. No. His answer came after a long silence. They mistook solitude for misfortune. Garrick glanced toward the courtyard where another wolf had settled beside Elara. They've chosen her. Kalen nodded slowly. I know. What does it mean? The alpha looked toward the distant mountains. I was hoping you could answer that. As evening settled across Frostvale, ancient bronze bells rang throughout the palace. Their deep voices echoed from tower to tower. Servants extinguished lanterns. Warriors removed their helmets. Even conversation stopped. Elara looked toward an elderly maid. What is happening? The sacred dawn howl begins at sunset during the first full moon after winter's longest night. Every wolf in the kingdom answers. And tonight, the maid's voice softened. His Majesty attends despite his wounds. The entire palace gathered within the moon court. At its center stood an ancient circle of white stone engraved with faded runes older than the kingdom itself. Kalen stepped into the circle. One by one, hundreds of wolves appeared from every corner of the palace grounds. Their howls rose together beneath the moon until the mountains themselves seemed to answer. Elara watched in silent wonder. Then, every howl stopped. The silence was deeper than the storm had ever been. From the highest ridge beyond the palace walls, a single white figure descended through the moonlight. His fur glowed like untouched snow. Age rested upon him like quiet wisdom. Every wolf lowered itself immediately. Even Kalen bowed his head. Fenrir had come. The ancient guardian walked slowly through the kneeling wolves, past the alpha, past the royal council, past the assembled nobles. His pale blue eyes settled on only one person. Elara. Without hesitation, the oldest wolf in Frostvale stood before her. Then he gently touched his nose against her forehead. The ancient runes beneath their feet suddenly began to glow. And somewhere deep beneath Moonstone Palace, something that had slept for centuries awakened. The glowing runes faded as quickly as they had awakened. Silence settled over Moon Court. Not ordinary silence. The kind that followed when history changed before hundreds of witnesses. No one dared move. Fenrir remained standing before Elara, his icy blue eyes never leaving hers. They were ancient eyes, older than every stone in Moonstone Palace, filled with memories no living soul could possibly understand. Elara hesitated before lifting a trembling hand. May I? The ancient wolf gave the smallest nod. Her fingers brushed the thick white fur along his neck. Warm. Alive. The instant she touched him, a sharp pulse rushed through her fingertips. The world disappeared. She stood beneath a bright spring sky. The endless snow of Frostvale had vanished. Green valleys stretched toward distant mountains, and children laughed beside a crystal river where wolves and humans drank from the same water without fear. A young woman dressed in deep blue knelt beside a white wolf nearly identical to Fenrir. You must remember, the woman whispered. One day they will forget. The wolf lowered his head. So someone must remind them. The vision shifted. Flames swallowed wooden homes. Soldiers wearing silver armor marched through smoke, while frightened wolves fled into the forests. Ancient scrolls burned. Stone monuments were torn apart. People cried out one name over and over. The Guardians. Find every Guardian keeper. A little girl clung to an older man's hand as they escaped into the trees. The man's face turned just long enough for Elara to recognize the silver pendant hanging around his neck. A crescent moon. 7 stars. The same symbol she had seen on the wounded wolf. The same symbol carved above the forgotten shrine near her village. The same symbol that had once belonged to her father. The vision shattered. Elara gasped and staggered backward. Strong hands caught her before she could fall. Kalen. His injured shoulder trembled beneath the effort, but he ignored the pain. Easy, he said quietly. His steady voice anchored her racing thoughts. You saw something. She nodded slowly. It felt She struggled to find words, like someone else's memories. Around them, the gathered nobles had begun whispering. Several council members looked openly disturbed. Others appeared frightened. Lady Seraphine alone remained perfectly composed. Too composed. Her eyes lingered on Fenrir before shifting to Elara with measured calculation. "Interesting," she said smoothly. "I have attended every sacred dawn howl for 20 years. She folded her gloved hands. "I've never witnessed such theatrics." Fenrir answered her with a low growl. The sound echoed through the courtyard like distant thunder. Every wolf immediately stood. Warriors instinctively stepped backward. Even seasoned pack alphas refused to meet the ancient guardian's gaze. Only Seraphine remained standing, smiling. "Remarkable." Kaelin's voice cut through the tension. "Enough." His tone was calm. It did not need to be louder. The entire court fell silent. He looked toward Elara. "Walk with me." No one questioned the order. Moonstone Palace changed after that night. Servants no longer whispered when Elara entered a room. Instead, they bowed respectfully, some out of genuine gratitude, others because the wolves had already decided how she should be treated. The royal wolves followed her everywhere. They waited outside her chamber, escorted her through the gardens, curled beside her whenever she sat beneath the palace pines, not because anyone ordered them, because they wanted to. Elara found the attention overwhelming. One afternoon, she escaped to the old palace library, hoping the forgotten shelves would offer a little peace. Dust covered countless leather-bound volumes untouched for decades. She wandered between towering shelves until one weathered book caught her attention. Its spine carried a faded crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars. Her heart quickened. She carefully opened it. Most pages had been torn away. The remaining ones showed faded sketches of humans standing beside wolves. Neither ruled the other. Neither served the other. They stood together. Across the top of one surviving page, barely visible beneath water stains, were 3 words: "Guardian Keepers of Frostvale." Before she could read further, another voice interrupted. I wondered who would find that first. Kaelin stepped from the shadows. He wasn't wearing his royal cloak today. Only a simple dark tunic covered by the bandage beneath his shoulder. Without the heavy symbols of kingship, he looked less like a ruler and more like the weary man she had found beneath the cedar tree. "You knew this book existed?" Elara asked. "I knew someone removed most of it." He gently turned another damaged page. "My father searched for years. He believed our kingdom was built upon a lie." Elara looked up. "What kind of lie?" Kaelin's eyes rested on the faded drawings. "History says wolves conquered this land." His fingers brushed the ancient ink. "But every piece of evidence I find tells another story. A partnership." Before Elara could answer, Nico bounded into the library with all the enthusiasm only a young wolf possessed. The tiny pup carried something in his mouth. Not a toy, a rolled parchment tied with black ribbon. He proudly dropped it at Kaelin's feet. Garrick hurried into the room moments later, breathing hard. "My king!" He looked from the parchment to Nico and sighed. "I've searched half the palace." Kaelin untied the ribbon. His expression darkened. Inside was a map of Moonstone Palace. Several hidden passages had been marked in fresh ink. One tunnel led directly beneath the royal chambers. Another, beneath the sacred shrine. Someone inside the palace knew every secret passage. Someone close enough to move unnoticed. Someone preparing for something far larger than a failed assassination. Kaelin slowly rolled the map closed. The poison wasn't the beginning. His golden eyes met Elara's. It was only the first move. At that exact moment, somewhere beyond the library walls, Lady Seraphine stood inside her private chamber. A hooded messenger waited beside the fire. "The girl remembers more quickly than expected," the messenger whispered. Seraphine calmly sealed a letter with black wax. "Then we move sooner. And the Alpha." She looked into the dancing flames. "He still believes he's hunting traitors." A cold smile touched her lips. "He doesn't yet realize. They've been living beside him for years." Snow drifted silently beyond the palace windows, but inside Moonstone Palace, winter no longer felt peaceful. Every smile carried suspicion. Every corridor seemed to hold unseen eyes. Since the discovery of the hidden map, Kaelin had quietly doubled the palace guard. Yet he did so without public announcement. Whoever had poisoned him clearly possessed influence within the court. Announcing an investigation would only force the traitors deeper into hiding. Instead, he watched. And he waited. 3 evenings later, Elara stood beside one of the palace kitchens, helping elderly servants prepare bundles of dried herbs for the royal healers. It reminded her of home, where every leaf had mattered through the long winter. The cooks had long since stopped treating her as a guest. To them, she had become family. One elderly woman smiled as Elara tied another bundle. "You know," she said softly, "His Majesty hasn't eaten a proper meal since returning." Elara looked up. "His shoulder still pains him?" The woman nodded. "He pretends otherwise." Elara said nothing, but quietly set aside a handful of willow bark and mountain thyme. Hours later, after the palace had fallen quiet, she left the herbs outside Kaelin's study with no note and no expectation of thanks. When dawn came, the herbs were gone. Nothing else was said. That evening Kaelin found her feeding the palace ravens beside the eastern wall. You knew which herbs to choose. She looked at the birds instead of him. "My mother taught me. They ease fever." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. "You never ask for anything." She smiled faintly. "I've spent most of my life with nothing." The answer lingered between them. For perhaps the first time in many years, Kaelin realized there was a difference between surviving and being cared for. Before either could speak again, tiny paws scrambled across the frozen courtyard. Nico, the little wolf, skidded to a stop at Elara's feet, carrying something clenched between his teeth. A strip of black cloth, freshly torn. His tail wagged proudly. Garrick examined it. "This belongs to the palace scouts." Kaelin's expression hardened. "Not anymore." The cloth smelled faintly of lamp oil, smoke, and damp stone. Underground. Nico barked once before racing toward the oldest wing of Moonstone Palace. "This way!" Garrick called. The four followed the pup through narrow corridors forgotten by most servants. Cobwebs hung between cracked pillars, and centuries of dust covered faded mosaics depicting wolves standing beside human guardians. The deeper they descended, the colder the air became. Finally, Nico stopped before an enormous stone fireplace abandoned long ago. He scratched once at the floor. Elara frowned. "The stones. They're loose." Kaelin knelt despite the pain in his shoulder. Together, he and Garrick lifted the heavy slab. A breath of icy air rose from the darkness below. "Hidden stairs. They were marked on the map," Elara whispered. Kaelin nodded. "And someone has used them recently." Fresh footprints disturbed the dust. They descended in silence. Torchlight flickered across ancient walls covered in faded carvings. Unlike the polished grandeur of the palace above, these tunnels belonged to a forgotten age. Every carving showed humans and wolves standing shoulder to shoulder. Not masters, not servants, equals. Elara slowed before one weathered mural. A young woman wrapped her cloak around an injured wolf. The resemblance struck her immediately. Kaelin noticed it too. "I've never seen this." They erased everything above. Elara brushed away centuries of dust. But they couldn't erase the stone. Further ahead, voices echoed through the tunnels. Kaelin raised one hand. Everyone stopped. 2 hooded figures stood inside a circular chamber illuminated by blue crystal lanterns. Maps of the 7 packs lay spread across a stone table. Small black markers rested upon each territory. One figure spoke first. "The western pack is ready. And the eastern border? They'll move once the moon seal is ours." Elara's heartbeat quickened. The moon seal. Without it, no royal decree could unite the 7 packs. The kingdom would fracture, exactly as the conspirators intended. Kaelin stepped into the light. "Your meeting is over." Steel rang through the chamber. One hooded figure drew twin blades. The other reached for a hidden satchel. The fight exploded without warning. Garrick intercepted the first assassin with practiced precision, their swords crashing against the ancient stone floor. Kaelin met the second. Though still recovering from poison, he moved with calm efficiency rather than reckless strength. Every strike forced the assassin backward. Elara searched the chamber instead of joining the fight. Something felt wrong. Too easy. Her eyes landed on the stone table. One map corner fluttered despite the still air. Hidden beneath it, a narrow tunnel. "Kaelin!" She barely finished speaking before another masked figure burst from the concealed passage. Not toward the battle, toward the royal shrine beyond the chamber. "The seal!" Elara shouted. The third conspirator had never intended to fight. The others were merely a distraction. Without hesitation, Elara ran. Cold air burned her lungs as she raced through the narrow passage. Behind her, she heard Kaelin calling her name, but the tunnel twisted sharply between ancient walls. She emerged inside a forgotten sanctuary hidden beneath the palace. At its center stood a stone pedestal. Upon it rested a silver disc engraved with a crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars. The royal moon seal. The masked figure reached it first. Elara lunged. Her fingers brushed the thief's cloak. For one brief moment, she caught sight of a silver ring beneath the stranger's glove. A ring engraved with the crest of the royal council. The figure struck a hidden lever. Stone walls trembled. The floor split apart. A heavy gate crashed down between them. "No!" Elara cried. The conspirator disappeared into darkness, taking the royal moon seal. Moments later, Kaelin reached her side. The silence that followed was worse than any battle. He looked at the shattered pedestal, then toward the sealed passage. His voice was quiet. "They've taken the one thing that holds the kingdom together." Elara stared at the empty pedestal, her heart sinking. This had never been about murdering one king. It had always been about destroying every pack. And somewhere beyond the mountain passes, the traitors already had what they came for. The theft of the royal moon seal changed Frostvale overnight. Before sunrise, royal messengers rode across the kingdom, their horses cutting through fresh snow toward every pack territory. Bells rang from mountain watchtowers, summoning alphas to an emergency winter moon gathering at the ancient Howling Cliffs. For generations, the gathering had been a celebration. Now it would become a trial. No one spoke openly of civil war, but everyone feared it. Without the moon seal, every order issued by the Alpha King could be questioned. The 7 packs had remained united for centuries because the seal represented more than royal authority. It represented trust, and someone had stolen it. 3 days later, Kaelin stood upon the highest balcony of Moonstone Palace, watching the first rays of dawn touch the snow-covered peaks. His shoulder had healed enough for battle. His heart had not. He heard quiet footsteps behind him. Elara. She carried the old, carefully mended cloak that had once kept him alive beneath the cedar tree. "I found this in the palace seamstress room," she said softly. "They repaired it." Kaelin accepted the cloak with both hands. His fingers lingered over its worn fabric. "This kingdom possesses treasures made of gold." He looked at her. "But nothing here has ever been more valuable than this." Elara smiled gently. "It was only a cloak." "No." Kaelin shook his head. "It was a choice." For the first time since they had met, silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, earned. By midday, thousands had gathered beneath the towering cliffs. The 7-pack alphas stood in a great circle carved into the frozen stone. Warriors lined the ridges. Villagers filled the lower slopes. Above them all, ancient wolves watched from snow-covered ledges as cold mountain winds carried the echoes of distant howls. Lady Seraphine arrived dressed in silver robes, every movement graceful, every expression perfectly controlled. She bowed before Kaelin. "My king." Her voice was calm. "I pray today's gathering restores peace." Kaelin studied her quietly. "So do I. Nothing more." His restraint unsettled her far more than anger would have. The council assembled. One by one, accusations filled the frozen air. The seal was stolen under royal protection. Someone inside the palace betrayed us. The Western packs demand answers. Fear spread through the gathered crowd. Exactly as the conspirators intended, Seraphine stepped forward. "Until the moon seal is recovered," she said smoothly, "perhaps temporary authority should rest with the royal council." Several nervous nobles nodded. The suggestion sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Kaelin remained silent. Instead, he turned toward Elara. Every eye followed. Confusion rippled across the assembly. Why would the Alpha King look to an orphan at a moment like this? Elara understood immediately. He wasn't asking her to speak. He was asking whether she trusted what they had discovered together. She did. Without hesitation, she stepped into the center of the ancient stone circle. The seal was never the true target. Her clear voice echoed across the cliffs. "It was our trust." The murmuring stopped. She continued. "The hidden tunnels beneath Moonstone Palace were built by the Guardian Keepers. Not to seize power, to protect it. She held up the damaged pages recovered from the ancient library. Their history was erased, their monuments destroyed. The partnership between wolves and humans was buried because someone wanted the kingdom divided. Seraphine laughed softly. Old stories. Nothing more. Before Elara could answer, a single howl rolled across the mountains. Deep, ancient, powerful. Every wolf froze. From the northern ridge, Fenrir appeared. The oldest guardian descended slowly through untouched snow, his white coat glowing beneath the winter sun. One by one, wolves emerged behind him. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Not merely royal wolves. Every pack, every territory, every generation. None looked toward the council. None looked toward the gathered nobles. Every one of them walked past Seraphine and surrounded Elara. Complete silence settled over the cliffs. Fenrir stopped before the young woman. He turned toward the assembled kingdom, then raised his head. His howl shook the mountains. The answer came instantly. Thousands of wolves lifted their voices together. The cliffs trembled beneath the sound. The ancient stone beneath Elara's feet suddenly blazed with silver light. The forgotten runes awakened once more. Hidden beneath centuries of snow, the true crest of Frostvale emerged. Not a crown, not a throne, a human hand beside a wolf's paw, the oldest promise of the kingdom. Kalen stepped beside Elara. He looked not at the crowd, but at Fenrir. The ancient guardian lowered his head. It was enough. Kalen understood. He faced the 7-pack alphas. The first pack has spoken. No law stands above truth. Garrick raised one gloved hand. Royal guards emerged from every side of the gathering. Not surrounding Elara, surrounding Seraphine. For the first time, the councilwoman's perfect composure cracked. You have no proof. Kalen calmly held up the silver ring recovered from the hidden sanctuary. The crest of the royal council glinted beneath the winter sun. Then another figure stepped forward. The hooded messenger captured during the night's pursuit removed his hood. He fell to one knee. I confess. Every word echoed through the stunned gathering. Lady Seraphine ordered the poisoning. She ordered the theft. She promised the packs would destroy one another before spring. Gasps swept across the mountains. Seraphine's shoulders slowly slumped. Years of careful deception ended in a single moment. She offered no denial, only silence. Royal guards led her away as the gathered nobles watched in disbelief. No sword decided the kingdom's future. Truth did. As evening approached, the recovered moon seal was returned to its rightful place before every pack. Kalen accepted it only long enough to place it back upon the ancient stone. Then he turned toward Elara, in front of every alpha, in front of every family, and before the first pack, he offered his hand. Walk beside me, not because fate commands it, not because prophecy demands it, but because I cannot imagine rebuilding this kingdom without you. Tears shimmered in Elara's eyes. For most of her life, she had believed kindness only led to loss. Now she understood. Kindness had led her home. She placed her hand in his. I choose to. The wolves answered with joyful howls that echoed across Frostvale as dawn's first light broke through the clouds. Months later, spring finally reached the kingdom. Children laughed beside rivers where wolves drank without fear. The forgotten guardian sanctuary was rebuilt stone by stone. The old cloak hung inside its entrance, not as the possession of a queen, but as a reminder that the greatest legends begin with the smallest acts of compassion. Far above the valley, Fenrir watched the renewed kingdom one final time. He gave a quiet, satisfied howl toward the distant northern mountains. Another ancient howl answered from beyond the horizon. Then the old guardian disappeared into the whispering pines. The world of Frostvale would continue, but its future would never again be built upon fear. It would be built upon the same simple choice that had changed everything on one freezing winter night. A forgotten girl had given her last warm cloak to a dying wolf, and in doing so, she had saved an entire kingdom.